The night had been silent in the countryside, the kind of silence broken only by the occasional call of a distant owl or the restless stirring of cattle in their pens. Farmers had long since gone to bed, their days measured in sunrises and hard work, their nights in the quiet wait of dreams. But that silence was broken by something no man had ever expected to hear in such a place. A thunderclap from a sky without clouds, followed by a streak of light that tore across the heavens like a wound opening in the dark. People stepped out of their doors to see the flare burn against the firmament, its brilliance unnatural, its descent swift and certain. And then came the impact, an echo that rattled windows, frightened animals, and left the ground trembling as though the earth itself had gasped. At the edge of the wheat fields, in a shallow valley by a stream, the thing had fallen. The first to reach it were not soldiers or scientists, but simple folk whose hands were calloused from labor, whose eyes knew little more of the world than their village and the occasional trip to the city. What they found was not fire and smoke, but a capsule, metallic and alien, scorched by its fall yet miraculously intact. It hummed faintly as though it breathed. Fear rippled through them, and superstitions whispered in their minds of omens and curses. Yet curiosity held them, for they were human, and humans have always been drawn to the unknown even as it frightened them. When the hatch slid open with a sigh none could explain, they stepped back, expecting fire or some monstrous creature. But what they saw disarmed them completely. A small form wrapped in silvery cloth, no larger than an infant. Its skin glowed faintly with a bluish pallor, its features strange but not grotesque. Its eyes, though heavy with exhaustion, opened enough to reveal pools of silver light, reflective like molten metal. It made no sound at first, only weak movements as though it had traveled too far, through trials unimaginable, and now lay at the mercy of those who had found it. Against all instinct of fear, the gathering villagers fell into hushed awe. This was not a beast. This was a child. Debate flared instantly. Some urged that it should be left where it was or handed to authorities who would know what to do. Others, suspicious of governments and fearful of what might become of something so strange, argued that if the child were taken by officials, it would never again see the light of day except under glass and steel. In the end, choice came not by argument but by compassion. An older couple without children, farmers who had lived their lives in modest peace, stepped forward. They saw the weakness of the small being, the way it reached instinctively toward warmth, and their hearts moved before their reason could halt them. They gathered the child into their arms and carried it home. It was the beginning of something no one had planned for, something no one could predict. In their small farmhouse lit by oil lamps and the scent of earth still clinging to their boots, they unwrapped the cloth and revealed the child fully. Its limbs were slender but not frail, its form nearly human though marked by subtle differences. Skin faintly luminescent under moonlight, ears tapered more finely, eyes that seemed older than they should have been. Yet when it cried like any infant, a sound of need that pierced through strangeness and struck the universal chord of parenthood. The couple, though uncertain, found themselves answering that cry not with fear, but with the instinct to comfort, to feed, to protect. And thus the alien child became theirs. The early years passed in secrecy. They told few of the discovery, and those who had been present swore themselves to silence, partly out of fear, and partly out of an unspoken respect for the family who had taken responsibility. Raising the child was no simple task. It ate differently, though it adapted to bread and milk with surprising ease. It learned to walk quickly, its balance preternaturally steady, its gaze often fixed on stars as though remembering. Yet it laughed too, a sound that startled the parents at first for its echoing resonance, but soon became as precious as any human laugh. They named him Arik, for he needed a name, and he accepted it as naturally as breath. Language came slowly but surely. At first his attempts were halting, his tongue struggling with sounds not native to him, but children are sponges, and he absorbed words with astonishing speed once he began. He learned to call his parents by the names the neighbors used, learned the names of animals on the farm, learned to say home with a conviction that made his mother weep the first time she heard it. The family understood that they were raising not a curiosity but a son, and though he was unlike any other, love erased difference in the daily rhythm of life. Still, there were reminders that he was not human. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark, visible even when lamps were extinguished. His wounds healed faster than they should have. His memory was flawless. Once he saw a page of scripture, he could recite it word for word. The villagers began to notice. Whispers spread quietly, not in malice but in wonder. Some crossed themselves when he passed, others smiled nervously, but none betrayed the secret, for he had grown among them and shown nothing but gentleness. He helped carry water, tended animals, played with other children without arrogance or cruelty. He was different, yes, but he was theirs, part of their lives, and humans are protective of what they have come to love. By the age of 7, Eric displayed more than intellect. He displayed empathy beyond his years. He comforted those in sorrow with a maturity uncanny for a child, asking questions that cut to the heart of grief, and then offering words that lifted burdens. Once, when a neighbor's cow went missing, Eric wandered the hills until he found it caught in a thicket and returned it, scratched but triumphant. His parents began to sense that his strangeness was not a curse, but a gift, something that reflected back their own humanity in sharper relief. They taught him restraint, humility, and the value of hard work, knowing that his abilities could lead to pride if not guided. And yet, as all children do, he tested limits. One evening in frustration, when teased by older boys, he lashed out with a force disproportionate to his size, sending another tumbling with bruised ribs. Shocked by what he had done, he withdrew into himself, fearing rejection. But the family and even the injured boy, after his pain subsided, forgave him. His parents sat him down and told him that strength without control was destruction, but strength guided by compassion could heal. From that day, Eric vowed never again to use his power in anger. He kept that promise, though it weighed heavily at times. As years passed, Eric grew into a youth of striking presence. He worked the fields, his strength making labor light, but he never flaunted it. He studied by lantern light, devouring books borrowed from the small-town library, his mind hungry for knowledge of history, philosophy, and science. Yet what fascinated him most was not the mechanics of machines or the wars of nations, but the poetry of humans. Their songs, their stories, their capacity to dream beyond their circumstances. He would sit beneath the night sky, listening to his father speak of struggles endured during hard winters, and marvel not at the hardship but at the resilience. Humanity, he realized, was fragile in body but unbreakable in spirit, and that realization shaped him more than any alien memory could. Despite the peace of their household, the outside world could not be ignored forever. Government rumors spread of unidentified objects in the region, of strange sightings in the skies. Investigators occasionally passed through, asking questions, peering too closely at the villagers. Each time, Eric's parents held their breath, praying he would not be noticed. He learned to avoid strangers, to dim the unnatural glow of his eyes by lowering his gaze, to keep his abilities hidden. Still, he felt the weight of secrecy pressing against him. Who was he, truly? Where had he come from? The capsule had been buried and forgotten, but the questions remained. His parents answered as best they could, but their love, not their knowledge, defined his identity. He was their son, and that was enough for a time. As adolescence approached, the difference between Eric and his peers widened. While others stumbled through the clumsiness of growth, he moved with grace. While others struggled in lessons, he absorbed material effortlessly. Yet rather than distance himself, he helped them. He explained arithmetic patiently, taught younger children to read, mediated disputes with fairness that impressed even adults. Some grew envious, but most grew to admire him. In the eyes of the village, he was strange, yes, but he was also a source of quiet pride. If the world beyond ever came looking, they would protect him as their own. But protection had its limits. The world was changing, technology advancing, and secrecy was fragile. Eric's parents knew the day would come when questions could no longer be avoided. They spoke to him often about choices, about the responsibility that came with difference. "You are not bound to us by blood," his father said one evening, "but by the love we chose to give. Whatever you become, remember that humanity is not measured in origin but in how you live among others." Those words etched themselves into Eric's soul more deeply than any genetic memory. And so section 1 of his story closes with a boy who is neither fully human nor wholly alien, yet shaped profoundly by the simple virtues of a farming family: compassion, humility, resilience. He looked to the stars often, wondering what they held, but when he looked back at the worn hands of his parents, the laughter of his village, and the fragile beauty of human life, he felt a belonging no star could give. He did not yet know the trials ahead, the forces that would seek to claim him, the choices that would tear him between blood and heart. But he knew one truth with certainty: whatever he was born as, he had been raised human, and that was the foundation on which all else would stand. Eric entered the years of early manhood with the kind of presence that could not be ignored. His frame had grown taller than his peers, his shoulders broad with the muscle of farm work, yet his movements retained an almost unnatural fluidity. He carried himself with quiet confidence, never loud or boastful, but with a strength that seemed undeniable even when he was silent. The villagers, who once whispered in secret about his strangeness, began to accept it as a kind of inevitability. They might not have understood what he was, but they understood who he had become. The boy who helped their sick, who shared his labor without complaint, who stood between quarrels to restore peace. Their suspicion faded, replaced with a respect that bordered on reverence. But Eric himself wrestled with unease. As he grew, so too did the abilities he could no longer fully ignore. He began to hear whispers of thought around him in moments of heightened emotion, catching fragments of words never spoken aloud. His strength, though restrained, seemed limitless when tested, and his vision pierced shadows as if darkness were no barrier at all. He could no longer dismiss these things as small curiosities. He was reminded, with each passing day, that his body did not fully belong to the human world he loved. The turning point came one summer when a storm swept across the countryside, with fury unlike anything the villagers had seen. Lightning ripped the skies, rain poured in sheets, and wind tore branches from trees. The river swelled with alarming speed, threatening to consume the lower homes and wash away livestock. The villagers scrambled to secure what they could, but panic quickly overtook order. Amid the chaos, a young girl slipped and was pulled into the torrent of the river. Her screams pierced the storm. Without hesitation, Eric leapt into the raging waters. His parents shouted for him to stop, knowing that the current was strong enough to crush even a man. But Eric was not merely a man. The villagers watched in stunned silence as he moved against the flood with impossible strength, cutting through waves that would have drowned anyone else. He reached the girl, lifted her above the water, and pushed forward until he dragged her safely to the bank. When he emerged, carrying her limp but breathing form, the people fell quiet. They had seen feats of courage before, but this was something else. He had defied the raw force of nature itself. From that day forward, whispers spread not only within the village but beyond. Travelers spoke of the boy who had faced a flood and lived, and tales took on the shape of legend. The authorities eventually heard, and questions were asked, though none dared approach too directly at first. But Eric's parents knew the silence would not last. They sat him down by the firelight one evening and told him that his life could no longer remain hidden in the simplicity of the farm. The world beyond was stirring, and it would eventually come looking for him. Eric listened, his heart torn. The farm had given him belonging, his parents had given him love, and the villagers had given him community. But deep inside, he knew they were right. His gifts, however unnatural they seemed, carried responsibility. The storm had proved what he feared and hoped in equal measure, that he could alter fate when others could not. The question was not whether he would be discovered, but how he would choose to reveal himself when that moment came. It came sooner than expected. A group of strangers arrived in the nearby town, officials in dark suits, claiming to represent national research agencies. They asked polite but pointed questions, inquiring about unusual events, strange individuals, or unexplained phenomena. Some villagers, loyal to Eric, said nothing. Others, less cautious, spoke vaguely of a remarkable young man. Within weeks, the strangers made their way to the farm. They knocked at the door, smiling with official courtesy, but their eyes betrayed the hunger of men who sought control. They asked to see the boy. Eric's parents stalled, shielding him as best they could, but Eric knew the moment had arrived. He stepped forward himself, calm but resolute. The men studied him as though he were a specimen, not a person. They asked about his background, his education, his unusual strength. Eric answered with simplicity, offering no more than truth without detail. The officials hinted at opportunities, special schools, facilities where he could be nurtured, studied, perhaps weaponized. Eric declined, stating that his place was with his family and his people. Their smiles thinned. They left with promises to return. After they were gone, the farm felt smaller, the sky heavier. Eric's parents feared what was to come, but Eric himself felt clarity. He could not hide forever, nor could he abandon those who had raised him. If the world wanted to see what he was, then he would show them on his own terms, not as a subject of laboratories but as a son of humanity. In the months that followed, Eric began to travel beyond the village. He walked to the city, blending among crowds, observing the way society moved in currents of ambition and struggle. He worked alongside laborers at construction sites, his strength carefully restrained yet always sufficient to earn admiration. He studied at public libraries, devouring knowledge of history, literature, philosophy, and science. He listened to street preachers and politicians, to beggars and scholars, absorbing not only words but the essence of human striving. What struck him most was not the grandeur of cities or the brilliance of invention, but the resilience of ordinary people who bore their burdens daily with quiet dignity. One evening, he encountered a group of young men cornering a merchant in an alley, demanding money with threats. Eric intervened, stepping between them and their prey. The thugs laughed at first, mocking his youth, but their laughter faded when they realized his immovable presence. He disarmed them with effortless precision, not striking in rage but subduing with controlled strength. The merchant fell to his knees in gratitude, but Eric lifted him up, saying only that no man should live in fear of his neighbor. Word of the encounter spread, whispered in taverns and markets. People began to speak of a mysterious protector, a figure who appeared where injustice threatened and vanished before thanks could be fully offered. For Eric, it was not about heroism or recognition. It was about understanding his place. The more he saw, the more he realized that humanity's greatness lay not in power or knowledge but in compassion. They endured suffering, yet still reached for hope. They were flawed, often cruel to one another, but within them burned a fire of creativity, and were unmatched by anything he could remember from the fragments of his alien origins. He began to feel that his purpose was not merely to exist among them, but to amplify what was best within them. Yet danger shadowed his steps. The officials who had once visited the farm were not blind. Reports of a strange young man performing inexplicable feats reached their ears. Surveillance followed him discreetly, men in unmarked cars watching from a distance, cameras catching glimpses of his interventions. The more he acted, the more evidence accumulated. Eric understood that his secrecy was slipping away. He faced a choice: retreat into hiding or step into the open and risk everything. He chose openness. One night, standing before his parents, he declared that he would no longer run from the world's eyes. He would not allow fear to dictate his life. His father placed a weathered hand on his shoulder, pride and sorrow mingling in his gaze. His mother embraced him tightly, whispering that wherever he went, he would always carry their love. It was a farewell of sorts, though they would see him again. but they knew that once he walked into the wider world, he could never truly return to the simple life of the farm. Eric traveled farther, reaching universities and centers of learning where debates on human progress raged. He listened to scholars argue over the nature of morality, the direction of science, the destiny of civilization. He asked questions that unsettled them, questions born from both alien clarity and human curiosity. Some dismissed him, others feared him, but a few recognized in him a mind unbound by conventional limits. He learned quickly that knowledge without wisdom was dangerous, and that wisdom was often born not in books but in the lived experience of ordinary people. As his presence grew harder to ignore, so did attempts to control him. Agents confronted him directly, offering him positions in secret programs, hinting at the benefits of serving a greater cause. He refused each time, stating that he would not be a tool. His refusals made enemies, but they also inspired quiet allies, men and women who believed in his sincerity, who saw in him not a weapon but a mirror of what humanity might aspire to be. Conflicts followed. Once, when extremists attempted to detonate explosives in a crowded district, Eric intervened with swiftness that saved hundreds. But in doing so, he revealed strength no human could possess. Cameras caught fragments, blurred but undeniable. The world began to whisper not of myth but of reality. News outlets speculated about a figure beyond human limitation. Some hailed him as a savior, others condemned him as a threat. Governments scrambled to uncover his identity, fearing what they could not control. Eric, however, remained focused not on fame or survival but on the people. He walked among them still, unmasked, unclaimed, refusing to let fear dictate his choices. He spoke to crowds not with grand speeches but with simple words, that strength should serve, not dominate, that humanity's greatest power was its unity, that hope mattered more than fear. People listened because his actions had already spoken louder than any words. But he was not naive. He knew that the more visible he became, the closer danger would follow, not only for himself but for those he loved. He wrestled with the weight of responsibility, the balance between openness and protection. And as he stood beneath the stars one night, remembering the capsule that had brought him to this world, he realized a deeper truth. He had been sent away from a place he could no longer remember, but he had been raised here for a reason. Humanity was not simply his refuge. Eric's name could no longer remain hidden, though he had never sought recognition. The world now spoke of him openly, his deeds recorded in shaky videos, in eyewitness accounts, in rumors that spread faster than truth itself. To some, he was a protector sent by fate. To others, he was a dangerous anomaly who threatened the balance of power. Every nation, every leader, every shadowed organization seemed to have an opinion about the young man who defied limitation. But beneath all of this noise, Eric himself remained unchanged. He rose with the dawn, moved among ordinary people, and carried their burdens when he could. For him, the true measure of worth was not in headlines or debates, but in the faces of those who felt less alone because he had chosen to stand beside them. Yet the tension of the wider world pressed in on him. He began to feel the reach of power from governments that viewed him as a puzzle to be solved or a resource to be acquired. Attempts to follow him grew bolder. Drones tracked him across cities. Satellites traced his movements in open country. Agents tried to lure him with promises of partnership or attempted to trap him with threats. Each time, Eric answered with restraint, never with vengeance, for he knew that to unleash his full strength would only confirm their fears. But his patience was not endless, and his conviction grew firmer with each confrontation. He belonged to no power, and he would bend to no leash. This independence unsettled the powerful, yet it inspired ordinary people across borders. Stories of his interventions spread beyond nations. A collapsed mine in one country was cleared by a figure whose hands moved stones that machines could not shift. A wildfire consuming thousands of acres was slowed by a man who carried trapped families through smoke and flame. A disease outbreak saw him walking among the sick, tending to them with compassion, never asking for thanks. In each place he went, he left behind not just lives saved, but hearts ignited with the belief that humanity was not abandoned to its struggles. The people began to call him by names not of his choosing: guardian, sentinel, harbinger, even Messiah. He ignored such titles, for he knew the danger of worship. He told them simply that he was no more than a man raised by their kind, a man who had learned that life's meaning was not in dominion but in service. Still, the names spread, and with them the pressure of expectation. Some prayed for him, some demanded him, some feared him. He carried it all in silence, for he understood that greatness is not in being followed, but in never abandoning the truth when the world demands compromise. Inevitably, the day came when confrontation could no longer be delayed. A coalition of powerful states, threatened by his refusal to submit, moved against him. They declared him a destabilizing force, a danger to the balance of the world. Armies were quietly prepared, weapons tested, strategies written not for war against one another but against him. Eric knew of their movements long before they approached, for whispers of fear traveled faster than armies. He stood beneath the stars one night, weighing his path, and asked himself the question that haunted him most. Was he right to resist them, or should he sacrifice himself so that peace might be preserved? His answer came not from within, but from the people. In city squares, in villages, in crowded streets across continents, ordinary voices rose in protest against the march of armies. They held banners, spoke his name, and declared that he was not a threat but a symbol of their hope. For the first time in memory, millions united not in fear of one another, but in defense of one man who had reminded them of their shared humanity. Their courage moved him more deeply than any discovery of his alien heritage. They did not owe him loyalty, yet they stood for him because he had stood for them.